It was one of those evenings when the city looked tired. The streets were wet from a light drizzle that had come and gone, leaving behind the smell of damp earth and the reflection of streetlights in small puddles. People were hurrying home, umbrellas half open, each face carrying its own story. Among them walked a young woman, her bag slung over one shoulder and a paper cup of tea in her hand. She had just finished her shift at a small printing shop downtown. It wasn't the kind of job that made anyone rich, but it paid the bills and kept her days steady. She liked the routine, the soft hum of machines, the smell of paper and ink, the quiet rhythm of customers coming and going. The bus stop she used every evening wasn't far. She usually sat on the metal bench there, scrolling through her phone, waiting for her bus to appear through the fog of headlights. But that evening, something different caught her attention even before she sat down. There was a phone lying on the bench, a simple one, with a cracked corner and a blue cover that had started to peel. For a moment she thought someone might have just dropped it and gone into the nearby store. She looked around, scanning faces, but everyone seemed too busy, too far away. The phone just sat there silent, as if waiting for her. She hesitated. Picking up someone else's phone wasn't something she would normally do. But it was raining lightly again, and if she left it there, it would get wet. She reached out, picked it up carefully, and wiped it with the edge of her sleeve. The screen lit up for a second, showing the wallpaper, a photo of a small dog sitting by a window. Nothing strange about it, but something about that image felt oddly personal, as if it carried a story she wasn't supposed to see. She pressed the side button, expecting it to ask for a passcode, but to her surprise, it didn't. The screen unlocked straight away. Her first thought was that the owner must have turned off the lock to make it easier to find. Maybe they were nearby, desperately searching for it. She looked around again, holding the phone up slightly in case someone would notice and come over, but no one did. The drizzle grew a bit heavier, so she stepped under the small shelter of the bus stop and checked the time. Her bus was still 7 minutes away. She was about to put the phone in her bag and hand it over to the bus driver or the lost and found office later, when the screen lit up again. A message had popped up. It was short, but it made her pause. It said, "Please just answer me." "I'm scared." Her eyes widened. For a few seconds she stood there, unsure what to do. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it wasn't. Her heart beat a little faster as she stared at the message. Another one came almost immediately. "I didn't mean to disappear. I just don't know what to do anymore." Now she felt a chill, not from the cold, but from something else. The messages didn't sound random. They sounded desperate. She wanted to do the right thing, but what was the right thing in a moment like this? The bus arrived just then, splashing water on the curb as it stopped. She climbed in, still holding the phone, her mind spinning. She took a seat by the window, wiped the fog from the glass, and kept thinking about those messages. The phone didn't ring again, but her curiosity wouldn't rest. She thought of just ignoring it. People lost phones all the time, and maybe this one would find its way back somehow. But deep inside, something bothered her. The tone of those words. The way the person on the other end sounded like they needed help. When she got home, she placed the phone on her small wooden table. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. Her rented apartment was simple, 1 bedroom, 1 window, a few plants on the sill trying their best to stay alive. She made herself a cup of tea and sat down, staring at the phone as if it were something alive. It buzzed again. This time it was a call. The screen showed one word, "Mom." Her breath caught. She didn't know whether to answer or not. What if it was really the person's mother, worried sick? After a moment of hesitation, she picked up. "Hello," she said softly. For a few seconds there was only static. Then a woman's voice came through, trembling slightly. "Hello, who is this?" "Is this my daughter's phone?" The woman explained quickly, her voice shaky, filled with worry. She said her daughter hadn't come home since yesterday. She wasn't answering calls. They had tried tracking her phone, but it was off for hours, until just now. The young woman listened quietly, her chest tightening. She didn't know what to say. She explained that she had found the phone at a bus stop and had just picked it up to keep it safe. The woman on the other end sighed deeply, as if holding back tears. "Please, if you find anything, can you call me back?" When the call ended, the room felt heavy. She sat there for a long time, the tea on the table growing cold. She thought about the messages again, the ones that said, "I didn't mean to disappear." It suddenly didn't feel like something she could just ignore anymore. She decided to check the phone's notifications, careful not to go too far into private things. There weren't many recent messages, but one caught her eye. It was from someone saved as Leo. It said, "If you're reading this, please just talk to someone, anyone." Her chest tightened again. Whoever owned this phone was clearly struggling, and now that person was missing. The rain outside had stopped. She stood up, pacing slowly, unsure what to do next. Should she go to the police? Would they even take her seriously if she just said she found a phone? She didn't know the owner's name, only that someone somewhere was in trouble. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that message again. "Please, just answer me. I'm scared." It echoed in her mind like a whisper that wouldn't fade. By morning, she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to wait. She would try to find out who the owner was and make sure they were safe. She knew it wasn't her responsibility, but something deep inside told her this wasn't a coincidence. Maybe she was meant to find that phone. Maybe fate had placed it there for a reason. She charged the phone overnight, and by morning it was full of missed calls and new messages. One message stood out. It said, "Please, if you see this, go to the old pier. I'll be there until noon." The clock on her wall showed 10:20 a.m. Without thinking twice, she grabbed her bag and hurried out. The pier was about a 20-minute walk from her apartment, an old place by the edge of the river where people rarely went anymore. As she walked, she kept wondering if she was doing the right thing. What if this was dangerous? But her instinct said it wasn't. This wasn't about danger, it was about someone who needed help. When she reached the pier, the air was cold and quiet. The water moved slowly, brushing against the wooden posts. She looked around but saw no one. Only a stray cat sitting near a stack of old boxes. She called out softly, but no one answered. She waited a few more minutes, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Then the phone buzzed in her hand again. It was another message, this one from the same number as before. It said, "If someone found this phone, please tell my mom I'm sorry." Her heart dropped. She looked around again, scanning every corner of the pier. There was no one. Only silence. She took a few steps forward, her eyes searching the water, the benches, the shadows. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly, only that she couldn't just leave. After a few tense moments, she saw something on one of the benches. A small folded jacket, soaked from the drizzle. Underneath it was a note pressed down by a stone so it wouldn't fly away. She picked it up, her hands shaking slightly. The note wasn't long, but as she read it, tears welled up in her eyes. It spoke of guilt, of feeling invisible, of not wanting to be a burden anymore. She sat down on the bench, clutching the note, the phone still glowing softly in her other hand. She didn't know the full story yet, but she knew this wasn't just about a lost phone anymore. It was about a life that might still be saved if she acted quickly enough. As the morning light broke through the clouds, she realized that by picking up that phone, she had stepped into someone else's world, one filled with pain, hope, and a small window of time to make a difference. And even though she was just an ordinary person with an ordinary life, she felt a strange sense of purpose rising within her. She didn't know where this path would lead. But one thing was certain, she wasn't walking away. She tucked the note safely into her bag, looked at the phone one more time, and whispered to herself, "Hang on. I'll find you." Then she stood up and started walking, unaware that the decision she had just made would soon change not just one life, but two. The day had grown warmer, but the air near the river still carried a chill. The young woman walked with quick steps, the phone in one hand and the folded note safely tucked in her bag. Every few seconds, she looked down at the phone, half expecting another message to appear. Nothing came. She didn't know what to do first. The note had no name, no address, no clue about where the person might have gone. All she knew was that the sender had been on that pier not long ago, and that the phone's owner was probably the same person. Her thoughts raced as she walked. The woman who had called last night, the one who said she was the mother, she needed to know about this. Maybe she could help trace where her daughter had gone. She stopped under a tree, pulled out the phone, and found the recent call history. The number labeled Mom was still there. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed call. It rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. "Hello, did you find anything?" the woman asked anxiously. The young woman explained everything as calmly as she could, how she went to the pier, how she found the jacket and the note. The line went quiet for a moment, and then she heard soft sobs from the other end. She used to go there when she needed to think. the woman whispered. When things got hard, that's where she went. The young woman didn't interrupt. She listened quietly as the mother spoke about her daughter, how kind she was, how she always helped everyone else but rarely asked for help herself. How she had been struggling lately, though no one knew exactly why. I'm scared something bad might happen, the mother said through her tears. I'll help you, the young woman said softly, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. We'll find her. They agreed to meet in person at a small cafe near the river. When she arrived, the cafe was almost empty, filled only with the smell of coffee and the faint sound of an old song playing from a speaker in the corner. A woman sat by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup that had long gone cold. Her eyes looked tired, the kind of tiredness that comes from nights spent awake worrying. The young woman introduced herself and handed her the note. The woman's hand shook as she unfolded it. Her eyes moved across the words and a tear rolled down her cheek. I recognize her handwriting, she whispered. This is hers. For a while they sat in silence. Then the woman pulled out a small photograph from her purse, a picture of a smiling girl with bright eyes, holding the same small dog that was in the phone's wallpaper. That's her, she said. Her name is Lena. The young woman looked at the photo, memorizing the face. Something about Lena's smile carried warmth, like someone who had once loved life deeply, but had been dimmed by something heavy. The mother went on to explain that Lena had recently lost her best friend in an accident. They had known each other since childhood, and his passing had broken her in ways no one could fix. Since then, she had withdrawn from everyone, barely talking, barely eating, barely existing. She told me she was fine, the mother said softly, but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't fine, the young woman nodded. She had seen that same emptiness before, maybe not in others, but in moments of her own life when things had felt too heavy. That understanding made her feel even more connected to this stranger she had never met. They spent the next hour going through the phone together, hoping for any clue about where Lena might have gone. Most of the messages were old, friendly conversations, photos, reminders. But one thread stood out. It was with someone named Leo, the same person who had sent that message saying, "Please just talk to someone." The young woman opened the chat carefully. The messages were scattered but clear enough to paint a picture. Leo had been worried about Lena for weeks. He had tried to call her, begged her to meet him, told her she wasn't alone. His last message had been sent just hours before she found the phone. Do you think this Leo might know where she is? The young woman asked. The mother nodded quickly. He's her friend. They worked together at the animal shelter. That was something, a place to start. They decided to visit the shelter that afternoon. It was a small, quiet building on the edge of town, with barking dogs and meowing cats that filled the air with a strange mix of sadness and life. A man in his 20s greeted them at the entrance. He looked tired but kind, with worry written all over his face. When they mentioned Lena's name, his expression changed immediately. You found her phone? He asked quickly. The young woman nodded and handed it to him. His hands trembled as he held it. She texted me yesterday, he said quietly. She said she couldn't do it anymore. I didn't know what she meant. I tried to call her, but the phone was off. I went to her apartment this morning, but she wasn't there. He paused, running his hands through his hair, eyes glistening. If you found it at the pier, that means she was there. Maybe she's still nearby. They looked at each other, realizing time might still be on their side. The young woman spoke first. We should check the area again. Maybe she dropped something else. Maybe she's still there. The mother hesitated. I don't know if I can face it, she said weakly. I'll go, the young woman said gently. If she's there, I'll find her. Leo insisted on coming too. The three of them drove back to the pier together. The road was silent except for the sound of the wipers brushing away light rain. When they arrived, the sky had turned gray again. The wind had picked up, scattering small ripples across the water. The young woman led the way to the spot where she had found the jacket and the note. Everything looked the same, yet different, heavier somehow. As if the air carried secrets, they spread out, checking nearby benches, the small path that led to the trees, the empty boats tied to the dock. After several minutes, Leo called out, Over here! They ran to where he stood near a group of old fishing boxes. On one of them lay a keychain, a tiny silver heart with the name Lena engraved on it. The mother gasped softly, holding it close to her chest. She was here, Leo said. Maybe she went down by the rocks. They searched the area more closely. The young woman noticed a narrow path that led down toward the lower part of the pier, half hidden by bushes. She followed it slowly, her shoes slipping slightly on the wet wood. And then she saw it, something small and white near the edge of the water. A pair of sneakers. Her heart raced. She stepped closer, calling softly, "Lena, are you here?" There was no answer, only the sound of water gently hitting the stones. She turned and called out to Leo and the mother. They rushed down, panic in their eyes. Leo climbed down toward the rocks, scanning every corner. And then, from behind a cluster of tall reeds, they heard a faint sound, a cough, a small movement. "Lena?" Leo shouted, a weak voice answered, trembling. "Leo?" They ran toward the sound. There, half hidden by the tall grass and shivering from the cold, sat a young woman in a thin sweater, hugging her knees tightly. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. The mother dropped to her knees beside her and wrapped her arms around her daughter, sobbing. Oh, thank God. Thank God Lena didn't say much. She just leaned into her mother's arms, shaking softly, whispering, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt anyone." The young woman stood nearby, tears filling her own eyes. In that moment, she felt relief so deep it almost hurt. They called for help, and soon an ambulance arrived. The paramedics checked Lena, assuring them she was safe but exhausted and weak. They helped her into the vehicle, her mother holding her hand tightly all the while. Before they left, Leo turned to the young woman. "If you hadn't found that phone," he said quietly, his voice breaking, "I don't even want to think what would have happened." She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, feeling a mix of disbelief and gratitude. As the ambulance drove away, she looked at the phone one last time. The screen was cracked and wet, but it had somehow carried a message strong enough to change everything. That night, as she walked home, the city lights looked different, softer, almost alive. She thought about how a simple act, something as small as picking up a lost phone, could lead to something so big. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning, because what happened next would reveal a truth she never expected, one that connected her to Lena in ways that neither of them could have imagined. The following morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels both peaceful and heavy at the same time. The young woman sat by her window, staring at the soft light spilling through the curtains. Outside, the city was waking up, cars starting, shop shutters rolling open, people heading off to work as if nothing unusual had happened. But for her, everything felt different. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lena's pale face by the pier, the trembling hands, the weak voice, the tears of her mother. The sound of that faint cough kept replaying in her head. It was haunting, but also a reminder of something powerful, that life, even when it seemed ready to disappear, could still be pulled back from the edge. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. It was a message from the same number that had called her, Lena's mother. "Good morning, dear. Lena is stable now. The doctor said she'll be okay. She's resting. I can't thank you enough for what you did." The young woman smiled faintly, relief washing through her. She typed back, "I'm just glad she's safe." But deep inside there was still a sense of unease, a quiet voice asking questions that hadn't been answered yet. Why had Lena gone to the pier that day? What had finally pushed her that far? And why did it feel like there was something more to the story? Something unseen. She decided to visit the hospital later that day, not to intrude, but just to check in. Maybe it would give her peace of mind. By noon, she stood outside the small city hospital, holding a small bunch of flowers she had bought from a street vendor. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic. The corridors were filled with soft footsteps and the low hum of machines. When she reached Lena's room, she paused for a moment before knocking. A nurse smiled and motioned for her to enter. Lena was sitting up in bed, pale but awake. Her mother sat by her side, holding her hand. When they saw the young woman, both their faces softened. "You came," Lena's mother said, standing to hug her. "I just wanted to make sure you were both okay," the young woman replied quietly, placing the flowers on the table. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "You found my phone, didn't you?" The young woman nodded. "At the bus stop." It was just lying there. Lena stared at her for a long moment. Her eyes were filled with a kind of confusion, mixed with gratitude, as if she still couldn't believe someone had gone to such lengths for her. "I didn't think anyone would care," Lena said softly. Her mother reached out, squeezing her hand. "Don't say that." For a while, the three of them sat together in silence. Then Lena spoke again, her voice trembling. "I wasn't trying to disappear forever. I just didn't know how to stop the pain." The young woman didn't say anything. She knew that sometimes silence was the only kindness a person could offer. Then Lena looked at her directly. "When you picked up that phone, did you see the message?" "Yes," the young woman said quietly. "The one that said you were scared." Lena gave a small nod. "That was meant for Leo. He was the only one who noticed I wasn't okay. But I was too embarrassed to ask for help." Her mother wiped her eyes quietly. Lena continued, her words halting. "My friend who died, his name was Aaron. He was like a brother to me. We worked together at the shelter. After he passed, I felt like everything lost meaning. The phone, it had the last voice note he ever sent me. I couldn't listen to it again, but I also couldn't delete it. That's why I carried it everywhere." The young woman felt her throat tighten. "I understand," she said softly. "Sometimes holding on feels easier than letting go." Lena nodded slowly. "But when I lost the phone, it felt like the last piece of him was gone. I panicked. That's when I went to the pier. I thought maybe I could just stop thinking." Her words broke off there, and the silence that followed was heavy with everything left unsaid. After a moment, the young woman reached out and held her hand gently. "You're still here for a reason, Lena. Maybe losing that phone wasn't an accident. Maybe it was meant to bring someone to you." Tears welled in Lena's eyes again. She whispered, "Maybe." Over the next few days, the young woman visited them often. She didn't have family nearby, and somehow being with them felt like something she was supposed to do. Sometimes she brought tea, sometimes just a quiet smile. The hospital staff had grown used to seeing her around. One evening, as she was about to leave, Lena's mother caught her by the arm. "You know," she said softly, "before all this happened, I prayed for a sign. I didn't know what to ask for. I just wanted someone to help my daughter. I think you were that answer." The young woman didn't know what to say. She simply smiled and nodded, her eyes misty. But the story didn't end there. A week later, Lena was discharged. Her mother invited the young woman to their home for dinner, a small, warm place filled with family photos and the smell of cooking. There was laughter that evening, soft but real. For the first time in a long while, Lena smiled without forcing it. After dinner, the young woman and Lena sat by the window while her mother cleaned up. The sky outside was streaked with orange and pink. Lena turned to her. "You know what's strange? I can't stop thinking about how you found that phone. It feels like it wasn't random." The young woman smiled faintly. "I was just at the right place at the right time." Lena shook her head. "No, I think you were meant to be there." She reached for the phone, the same one that had started it all. "The day before I lost it, I changed my wallpaper. I had this feeling I couldn't explain. I picked this photo because it reminded me of something peaceful. I didn't know that the next day that same picture would lead you to me." The young woman looked at the dog on the wallpaper again. Small, gentle, sitting by the window. She smiled softly. "He looks like he's waiting for someone to come home." Lena nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yeah, maybe he was waiting for me." There was a pause, not an awkward one, but the kind that carries quiet understanding. Then Lena said something that stayed with her for a long time. "You didn't just find my phone. You found me." The young woman's chest tightened. She looked away toward the fading sunset, trying to steady her breath. She had never seen herself as a hero or savior. She was just someone who couldn't walk away. But something in her heart told her that she had done what she was meant to do. After that night, they stayed in touch. They talked often, about small things, about life, about second chances. Lena started going back to the animal shelter again, slowly rebuilding her days. The young woman visited sometimes, helping with the animals, laughing again in ways she hadn't in years. But the peace that came afterward didn't erase the weight she still carried, the knowledge of how close things had come to being very different. It stayed with her, shaping her thoughts, reminding her of how fragile people could be. One evening, weeks later, she sat by the river again, at the same spot where everything had started. The air was calm and the water shimmered under the setting sun. She pulled out her own phone, scrolling through photos aimlessly, until she stopped at one she had taken without realizing it, a blurry shot of the pier that day. She stared at it for a long moment, her heart heavy but full. Then a new message appeared on her screen. It was from Lena. It said, "I've been thinking, maybe we both found something that day. Not just a phone, not just a person, but a reason." She smiled, tears forming in her eyes again. She typed back, "Maybe that's what life is. Finding reasons in unexpected places." She slipped her phone into her bag, leaned back and watched the sunlight fade into gold. Little did she know, the reason she had found that day wasn't just to save a stranger. It was also to remind herself that no act of kindness, no matter how small, ever goes unseen. And sometimes saving someone else can also save a part of you. A few weeks passed and life began to settle into a gentle rhythm again. The young woman returned to her usual days at the printing shop. The sound of the machines, the scent of fresh ink, the quiet hum of customers, it all felt comforting in a way it hadn't before. Yet, even as she fell back into her routine, she carried something new inside her. It wasn't just the memory of what had happened, it was a kind of awareness, a quiet shift in how she saw the world. Every time she walked past the bus stop, she glanced at the bench where she'd found that phone. It looked ordinary now, as if nothing remarkable had ever happened there. But to her, that spot had become sacred, a reminder of how one small decision, one act of care could change everything. She hadn't seen Lena in a few days, though they still exchanged messages. Lena was doing better, her doctor said. She had started volunteering again at the animal shelter, spending her afternoons walking dogs and helping with adoptions. Each time they talked, her voice sounded stronger, steadier. Still, there was something in Lena's tone that lingered, something thoughtful, almost searching. The young woman sensed there was something more Lena wanted to share, but hadn't yet found the courage to say. One Thursday evening, as she was closing up the shop, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Lena. "Can you come to the shelter tomorrow? There's something I need to tell you." The message was simple, but it carried weight. The next day she went straight there after work. The sun was setting and the sky glowed orange and pink behind the row of old brick buildings. When she reached the shelter, the familiar sounds greeted her. Barking dogs, the rustle of straw, the gentle chatter of volunteers. Lena stood by the back gate, wearing a soft gray sweater and holding a small notebook. Her hair moved slightly in the evening breeze. And for the first time since they met, she looked calm, not healed completely. "But at peace you came," she said with a smile. "Of course," the young woman replied. "You sounded serious." Lena nodded. "I am. I've been thinking about everything. About that day, the pier, the phone, all of it. I keep wondering why it happened the way it did." The young woman leaned against the fence. Maybe it wasn't supposed to make sense. Maybe it was just meant to happen. Lena looked down at the notebook in her hand. "I found something," she said softly. "Something that belonged to Aaron." She opened the notebook and showed her. Inside were pages of small, neat handwriting, short journal entries, notes, and sketches. Some were dated weeks before the accident that had taken his life. "I didn't know this existed," Lena said. "His sister gave it to me a few days ago. She said he always carried it in his backpack." She flipped to a page marked with a folded corner. "You need to read this one." The young woman hesitated, then leaned closer. On the page were a few lines written in careful handwriting. "If one day I'm not around anymore, I hope someone reminds her that life doesn't end in darkness. Sometimes people you've never met will carry your light forward without knowing it, and maybe that's how we keep living." The young woman froze. Her chest tightened as she read the words again and again. "He wrote that about you," she whispered. Lena nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I think so. But when I read it, I realize something. Maybe it wasn't just about me. Maybe it was meant for both of us." The young woman looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Lena took a deep breath. "Do you remember the night I was found, the pier?" "Yes. I wasn't planning to leave. Not exactly. I just wanted to feel close to him one last time. That's why I went there. I sat for hours watching the water. I remember thinking that if someone or something was meant to stop me, it would. And then I dropped my phone." The young woman's heart skipped. "I dropped it without realizing it," Lena continued. "It must have slipped when I stood up to leave. And somehow, you found it." The words sank in slowly. The young woman shook her head in disbelief. So if you hadn't dropped it, if I hadn't been there that evening. Lena finished the sentence for her. You wouldn't have found me, and I might not be here. A soft silence followed. The air between them felt heavy with something unexplainable, something bigger than coincidence. I used to think fate was just a word people said when they didn't understand what happened, Lena said quietly. But now, I'm not so sure. Maybe some things are meant to happen exactly the way they do. The young woman's throat tightened. She didn't know how to respond. Lena smiled faintly. That day, when you picked up my phone, you didn't just save me. You also reminded me that people still care, even strangers. And maybe that's all it takes sometimes, to be reminded that we're not invisible. The young woman felt tears form in her eyes. You gave me something too, she said softly. You reminded me that life still surprises us. I'd started to forget that. For a moment, they stood there just looking at each other. The sound of dogs barking in the distance, the orange light fading into gold. Then Lena handed her the notebook. I want you to have this, at least for now. You're part of this story too. The young woman took it hesitantly. The pages felt warm, almost alive. Inside, among the notes and sketches, there was one more page with a small drawing of a dog sitting by a window. The same image that had been Lena's phone wallpaper. Her heart skipped. This picture? Lena nodded. Aaron drew it. He said it reminded him of peace. I think that's why I chose it as my wallpaper. I didn't realize it would help someone find me. The young woman ran her fingers gently over the drawing, feeling a strange connection she couldn't explain. It was as if the same picture that had first caught her eye on the bench weeks ago had been guiding her toward this moment all along. Later that evening, as she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, she kept thinking about everything Lena had said. She thought about the notebook in her bag, the words written by someone she had never met, yet somehow felt connected to. The sentence echoed in her mind. Sometimes, people you've never met will carry your light forward without knowing it. She couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, in some quiet way, that's what had happened. Maybe Aaron's light hadn't gone out. It had simply passed through her, through a stranger who just happened to be at the right place at the right time. That night, she placed the notebook on her bedside table and stared at it for a long while before turning off the lamp. The city outside was silent except for the soft hum of traffic. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm. Over the next few days, she started noticing small things she hadn't before. The kindness of people helping each other on the street, the way sunlight warmed the buildings, the laughter of children near the park. Life in all its small, ordinary ways suddenly seemed precious again. And one evening, as she sat by the river, the same river where she had once found the note, she took out her notebook and began to write. Not because she wanted to be a writer, but because she finally had something to say. She wrote about that night, about the phone, the messages, the rain, the fear, the hope. She wrote about Lena and about how strangers can become part of each other's stories without meaning to. And at the very end, she wrote a single line. Sometimes we find things we're never meant to find, but exactly when someone needs us to. She closed the notebook, smiled softly, and looked out over the water. The river moved slowly beneath the evening sky, carrying reflections of the city lights like tiny stars drifting across its surface. And for the first time, she understood that every moment, no matter how small or accidental it seemed, could carry meaning beyond what anyone could imagine. Because sometimes what feels like chance is actually a quiet miracle in disguise. Months had passed since that rainy evening when she first found the phone on the bench. The days had changed, and so had she. The air was cooler now, with autumn leaves dancing along the sidewalk each time the wind passed. Life had moved on, but not in the same way it once did. She no longer drifted through her routine like a passenger. Every morning she noticed the way the sun rose between the buildings, the smell of coffee at the corner cafe, and the friendly nods from strangers she passed. Everything seemed more alive, more connected somehow. Lena still called every now and then, her voice brighter each time. She'd started painting again, mostly small pictures of landscapes and quiet streets. Sometimes she sent photos of them, and the young woman hung one on the wall above her bed. It showed a single path through a forest lit by a soft golden light. One evening after work, she stopped by the old bench again. The city was buzzing with its usual noise, yet that spot still felt quiet, like a pause in the middle of everything. She sat down, set her bag beside her, and just watched the people go by, each one lost in their own story, unaware of how a single object, like a phone, could change a life for a moment. She imagined that same night again, the drizzle, the glow of streetlights, the hum of buses, and she realized how far she'd come since then. Just as she was about to leave, a voice spoke softly behind her. "Excuse me, are you waiting for someone?" She turned to see a man in his late 50s holding out a small stack of flyers. He smiled politely. "We're organizing a community drive this weekend. Food, blankets, and phone donations for shelters. Would you like to join?" She took a flyer and glanced at it. There it was again, something about phones. It felt almost like a gentle reminder from fate itself. She smiled. "Sure, I'll come." 2 days later, she arrived at the event early. Volunteers were already setting up tables, arranging clothes and canned goods, chatting cheerfully as the morning sun spread warmth over the small park. She found Lena there too, helping sort through donated items. The two women hugged tightly, the kind of hug that said everything without words. "You made it," Lena said. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied. Together they worked for hours, folding blankets, passing food parcels, laughing between small breaks. The park was filled with kindness that day, people giving what they could no matter how little. At one point, a little girl came up holding an old phone. "Does this help?" she asked shyly. Lena knelt down and smiled. "It helps a lot." "Thank you." The girl grinned and ran back to her mother. The young woman watched them and felt her chest tighten in that familiar way again, something between gratitude and awe. After the event, as they sat under a tree sipping tea, Lena said quietly, "You know what I realized today? Every person here probably has their own story. Maybe one act of kindness is what brought them here." She nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How we meet people for reasons we don't understand at the time." Lena smiled. "Maybe that's the point. We're not supposed to understand everything. We just have to show up when it matters." The young woman looked up at the sky, where clouds drifted slowly, and thought about how many small choices had led her to this very moment. Picking up that phone had once seemed like nothing, but now she knew it had been everything. The weeks went on, filled with new beginnings. The printing shop where she worked expanded its team, and her manager asked if she'd like to lead a small project about local stories, true experiences from ordinary people. The idea was to collect short accounts and print them in a small community journal. She loved the idea instantly. When she got home that evening, she pulled out Erin's old notebook, the one Lena had given her months ago. She turned to a blank page at the back and began to write. She wrote about chance encounters, about how one evening could tie strangers together forever. She wrote about small choices that ripple into something larger, about the quiet power of compassion. And as she wrote, she felt something peaceful wash over her. When the journal was finally printed, she gave the first copy to Lena. The cover was simple, just a drawing of the same dog sitting by the window, the image that had started it all. Underneath, the title read, "Found by Chance." Lena ran her hand over the cover and smiled. "He would have loved this," she whispered. "I think he already does," the young woman said. Months later, the story spread quietly through the neighborhood. People began leaving kind notes on benches and bus stops, messages that said things like, "You matter," and "Don't give up. Someone cares." It wasn't a movement or a campaign, it was just something small and gentle that caught on. But to her it felt like a continuation of what had begun that night. One afternoon she received a letter at the shop. There was no name, only a short note inside. "I found one of those notes you started leaving. I was having a bad day and it stopped me from making a mistake. Thank you for reminding me that I still matter." She read it twice, her hands trembling. Then she folded it carefully and placed it between the pages of Erin's notebook. Later that evening, she walked to the same river where she'd once written her thoughts. The sky was pale blue, fading into gold, and the water shimmered gently. She stood there for a while, thinking about everything, the bench, the phone, Lena, Erin's words, the notebook, and all the unseen threads that connected them. Then she took out her own small notebook and wrote a final line. The phone was never lost. It was only waiting to be found, just like us. She closed the notebook, feeling the weight of peace settle inside her. The wind brushed against her hair, carrying the scent of the river and the soft murmur of passing lives. As she turned to leave, she looked back one last time at the water, where a single leaf floated quietly downstream, carried by the current to wherever it was meant to go. She smiled, because in that moment, she finally understood something simple but beautiful. Sometimes we don't need to know why things happen. Sometimes it's enough to know that they did. And in that gentle truth, there was a kind of freedom. That evening, as she walked home beneath the glow of streetlights, she noticed a woman ahead of her drop her phone. Without thinking, she hurried forward, picked it up, and called out, "Excuse me, you dropped this." The woman turned, smiled in surprise, and thanked her warmly. It was such a small, ordinary moment, but to her, it felt like a quiet echo of everything that had come before. Life had come full circle, and she realized now that the smallest gestures often carry the biggest meaning. The story didn't end with a miracle or a headline. It ended with something simpler, a reminder that sometimes saving a life doesn't always mean grand acts of heroism. Sometimes it just means paying attention. And as she walked on, blending into the rhythm of the city night, she felt at peace, knowing that even the smallest act of care can leave ripples in the world, long after the moment has passed. Because somewhere out there, another story was beginning. And maybe, just maybe, it would start the same way, with a stranger, a quiet street, and a phone waiting to be found. A full year had passed since the night she found that stranger's phone. Time had moved on, as it always does, but traces of that evening still lingered quietly in her life. Every now and then, a small thing, a message, a face in a crowd, a note stuck to a wall, would remind her of how one small choice had rippled outward in ways she could never have imagined. The city felt different now. Maybe it was the same, but she saw it differently. There was warmth even in its noise, beauty even in its chaos. She'd learned to notice moments most people walked past. The kindness of someone holding a door, the laughter between friends at a bus stop, the simple act of a stranger offering directions. And every once in a while, when she saw someone lost or looking for help, she stepped forward without thinking twice. It had become part of who she was. One bright morning, she sat at her favorite cafe, the one near the river where she liked to watch the world go by. Her worn-out journal rested on the table, filled with pages of stories, small pieces of life she had collected over the months. Each page told about people she had met, kindness she had witnessed, or memories that had stayed with her. She wasn't a writer by profession, but writing had become her quiet way of keeping the world alive. As she sipped her coffee, a young man approached her table holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Are you the one who wrote Found by Chance?" She blinked in surprise. "Yes, how did you know?" He smiled awkwardly. "I work at the community center nearby. Someone left a copy of your book there. I read it a few weeks ago." She smiled, touched. "I didn't realize anyone was still reading that." "It helped me," he said simply. "My sister went through something hard last year. Your story, it made me see how even strangers can bring light back into someone's life. So, thank you." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Gratitude swelled in her chest, soft and heavy. Then the young man handed her the parcel. "I thought you might like this. It's just a small thank you." She carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a framed photograph of the river, taken at sunset. The same spot where she had once stood, where so many moments had unfolded. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He smiled. "That's where I go when I need to think. I didn't know it meant something to you, too." "It does," she said softly. They talked for a while longer, and when he left, she sat quietly, staring at the photograph. The light in the picture was golden, fading gently into the horizon, peaceful, endless. And she realized something then. The story had outgrown her. It no longer belonged just to her and Lena, or even to Aaron's memory. It belonged to everyone who had ever been saved by a small act of care. That thought made her smile. Later that day, she decided to visit Lena again. The two of them hadn't met in weeks, though they often exchanged short messages. Lena now worked part-time at an art studio, teaching children how to paint. The young woman loved hearing about it, how the kids made a mess of colors, how their laughter filled the small room. When she reached the studio, she saw Lena crouched beside a group of children, helping them mix paint. There was something so gentle about her now, something strong yet calm. When Lena saw her, her face lit up. "You came." "Of course. I wanted to see your new place." They sat together afterward, watching the children paint. One little boy held up a picture of a sunrise and shouted proudly, "It's a new day." Both women smiled. After class, they walked outside where the sun was beginning to lower, painting the world in orange light. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Lena said. "Remember that night at the pier? I used to think of it as the end of everything. But lately, I see it differently." "How so?" Lena looked up at the sky. "I think that night wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else. Maybe even for both of us." The young woman nodded quietly. "I think so too," Lena continued. "You know, sometimes I still talk to him. Not out loud, just in my heart. I tell him I'm okay now. That someone kind found me when I couldn't find myself." The young woman felt her throat tighten, emotion pressing behind her eyes. "You saved yourself, Lena," she said softly. "I just helped you see what was already there." Lena smiled through tears. "Maybe, but I think the universe knew what it was doing when it put you in my path." They stood together in silence, watching the children run along the path, their laughter floating through the air. Before they said goodbye, Lena handed her a small wrapped canvas. "This is for you," she said. "Don't open it until you get home." That evening, under the warm glow of her living room lamp, the young woman unwrapped it. It was a painting, a soft, dreamlike scene of the river at dusk. In the center of the water floated a single leaf, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Beneath it, Lena had written a single line in delicate handwriting, "For the one who picked up the phone." She smiled through her tears, holding the painting close. That night, as she placed the artwork beside the framed photograph from the young man, her small apartment felt filled with stories, each one born from something simple but profound. She didn't feel lonely anymore. Life had a quiet rhythm now, a gentle meaning that didn't need explaining. A few weeks later, she started volunteering at the community center too. Sometimes she helped collect donations. Other times she just listened to people who needed someone to talk to. And once in a while, someone would tell her about how a small act of kindness had changed their day. She always listened carefully, smiling to herself, knowing how true that was. One evening, as she was leaving the center, she saw a teenager sitting alone on the steps, staring at a cracked phone in his hands. "Everything okay?" she asked. He looked up, startled. Yeah, I just found this phone on the bus. Don't know what to do with it." For a moment, she just looked at him. The same confusion, the same hesitation she'd once felt. Then she smiled gently. "Maybe start by trying to return it," she said. "Sometimes finding something lost means more than you think." The boy nodded slowly. "Yeah, you're probably right." She walked away, her heart warm with the strange comfort of it all. Life, she thought, had a way of circling back, reminding us that what we give has a way of finding its way home. That night, as she wrote in her journal, she added one final entry. "It's strange how stories never really end. They just keep passing from one heart to another, like light moving from one window to the next. Maybe that's what kindness is, an endless story we all take turns writing." She closed the journal and placed it on her bedside table beside Lena's painting. Outside her window, the city lights flickered gently against the night sky, each one glowing like a quiet promise. And somewhere out there, she imagined another story beginning, maybe on a park bench, maybe under a streetlight, maybe with someone finding a phone that wasn't really lost, just waiting to be found again.